It is. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Sarah Elizabeth, and I am thrilled to be with you this afternoon. I know we have quite a few more people joining us. So we're going to start actually with a quick song, a recording of the Chicago Children's Choir singing in 1972, one of the favorite songs of the founder, as everyone joins us. So we'll just give about 2 minutes of music and then we'll kick it off with a welcome from the Hyde Park Historical Society.
Okay.
My iPad right next to this.
Oh, damn. I can't do it. We can't.
Thank you. Welcome. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. That was the Chicago Children's Choir in 1972 in Houston, on tour in Houston, so just a small portion of the choir. And I'd like to mention, just to bring your attention, how little the littles were. The choir used to have in the top level 8 to 18 or 19-year-olds sometimes. It no longer does, but it did. And young kids would go on tour, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old sometimes. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I'm going to invite the Hyde Park Historical Society to say their welcome first.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Welcome everybody from the Hyde Park Historical Society. My name is Michael Sopper. I'm the Vice President of the Society, and I'm trying to show some of the people here today. I would like to welcome you all again. Nice to see you. This seems to be something of a reunion for the Chicago Children's Choir. I'd also like to introduce our president, Clene Hedspeth, who's joining us for this program today. Clene joined us as president in October of last year, and we've been delighted to have her. And just a quick plug for the Hyde Park Historical Society. We do programs. We have a lot of exciting programs coming up this summer. In addition to this one, we'll be doing Olmsted in Chicago 2022. We have some tours, some walking tours of Hyde Park and Woodlawn planned. And lots of interesting things going on. We'll be doing International Promontory Point Day with the Promontory Point Conservancy coming up on May 29th. So anyway, you're welcome to go to our website and see all of these interesting things we have coming up. And at the end of the program, I will flash our website. And now I want to turn it over to Sarah and this very exciting program on the Chicago Children's Choir.
Thank you so much. And thanks again, Clinae Hedspeth, for inviting me. We got to know each other through some Indigenous Peoples Day activism work, actually. So I'm going to ask everyone to stay muted if you're not speaking, just for quality of sound for everyone else. And we'll do our best to have a really enjoyable, I hope, afternoon. Yes, I'm wearing the same sweater as in that picture. It's like my famous CCC sweater now. My hopes for today are that you enjoy this time, that you learn a lot, that you have questions come up that really make you want to read the book when it's finally finished, and other books that I cite, other authors, and that you keep learning history because it really is connected to the present and future. So thank you again all for being here. Because it's Ramadan, I'm going to ask if you are eating or drinking to turn your camera off out of respect. I don't know how to mute. Sometimes I can't mute people. So if Hyde Park Historical Society can help me mute people who accidentally come in on mute, that'd be great. Yes, because it's Ramadan, just to be respectful. And as I mentioned, if you could stay muted until hopefully around 2:45, I'm going to do my best. Feel free to use the chat to ask questions or put in comments. I may or may not see it until closer to the end, but I will definitely review it at that point. Please listen with respect and curiosity, listening to understand, not to judge or attack or criticize. So I am an amateur historian. I am an alum of the Chicago Children's Choir who has really dug into learning as much as humanly possible, but a lot of the period that I'm writing about, I was not in the choir, and a lot of it I wasn't even alive. So I've done my best. Please be compassionate. If I make mistakes, please call in as opposed to call out with a lot of shame and judgment that I'm not perfect, where none of us really are actually. Lean into discomfort. So I have a real commitment to anti-racism, anti-bias work, as I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. And some of that means talking about history that is not was not equitable, was not just, and was not kind or fair. And so if I say anything that makes you a little bit uncomfortable because of the content, or that you hadn't known that, that's okay. Just lean into that, know that that's your growing edge. It's actually a really good sign that you're learning something new. Take care of yourself. If you do need to eat or drink again, please just go off camera for a minute. And feel free to stay off camera the whole time until the Q&A to save bandwidth on your internet. Up to you. So keeping in mind everyone's impact over intent. So sometimes people say things and then they land differently compared to how it was intended, but we need to have compassion for each other. So just a little bit more about me as the author of this forthcoming book. I am a scholar, researcher, teacher, educator of over 20 years. I was trained at NYU and taught at NYU, Roosevelt, Loyola, at UIC. I've worked at Erickson Institute and the Onset Prevention Fund. Yeah, I bounced around because I'm a consultant. So I work part-time at a lot of different places, sometimes at the same time. My PhD is in education, not history. So I am a teacher. I am a teacher of teachers. I taught the last 3 years at UIC and absolutely loved it. And outside of my education work, I do anti-bias, anti-racism trainings with these amazing colleagues. I do have European ancestry. I'm white. And so I always try to center voices of the global majority, as well as LGBTQ and disabled and all sorts of differences that I don't have those identities. So that's part of the framing for the book. The book is not just a history of the choir, although that's the primary goal and focus. It's also my experiences, my lenses, and the interviews of over 100 at this point, alumni, parents of alumni, former board and former staff members, and members of the First Unitarian Church, where the choir lived for 31 years. all of us are shaped by all of our intersecting social group identities. So we all have many identities: gender, race, socioeconomic status, education level, age. Age is the only one that's guaranteed to change. Some people have religion. And all of these social group identities influence the way we experience the world and the way people respond to us. So I am white, I am cis, female, and other identities that aren't as critically important for me to share right now, but I just wanted to introduce myself in that way. So that does influence my research and my commitment to racial equity in always trying to uplift people of the global majority's voices, and also women who haven't always gotten the acknowledgement that they deserve. So I was in the choir 1988 to 1997. So I joined after the founder, the late Reverend Christopher Moore, had already died. That's me on the left as a child. And I got into the choir partially because of my mom, who's on the upper right, who died in 2001. And I always love to bring her into spaces if possible. Because I went to a Chicago public school by Cabrini Green, and the Chicago Children's Choir had an in-school program at that school. So Leslie Britton, who's a conductor with the choir here in the black sweater, was my conductor in 4th grade. And she invited some of the kids in the in-school choir to come to the after-school program and audition. And so some of you may know Molly Stone, who's a staff at University of Chicago, and Cece Hill, who's worked for the choir forever and was in the choir, and I thought she was going to come today. I want to honor her. She's one of the voices, as well as Molly and Leslie, who are in the book. So the journey of the book started kind of in 1996. No, I'm sorry, 2016, the 20th anniversary of 1996. So in 96, I had the privilege to go to South Africa with Molly Stone and Becky, who's on the call, and others. Some of the choir, not myself, got to sing for Mandela's. That was very cool. But in the summer of 2016, it was Governor Rauner's austerity times. There was very little work for an educational consultant who wanted to work part-time. There was very little grant money for professional development opportunities. And I ended up starting a Facebook group for the South Africa tour of the choir. That was like, and I posted every day, 20 years ago today, and I just posted pictures from our tour that year. So I tried to find as many alumni as I could and start reconnecting with folks, because I had not been on Facebook for a long time. I was a very late adapter. But I was back in Chicago after having lived in New York for 13 years, and I was like, let me look up some of my old friends. And then I was at City Hall in the fall of 2016, and I saw this photo on the wall from Mayor Daley's first inauguration in '89, the junior. And my daughter was with me, Molly, who was at the time 8 and had just started in the Chicago Children's Choir. And in the photo, I'm almost the same age that she was. You won't really be able to see me, but I'm in the second row here where my mouse is. I'm wearing a red headband. And it was a very emotional moment, actually, kind of realizing the choir was so significant in my life. I got to do all these incredible things, like sing at the mayor's inauguration at Orchestra Hall, and go to South Africa and many others, Japan and Russia, and sing with kids from all over the city who I wouldn't necessarily have gotten to know otherwise. And she was in the choir for 4 years, up until the pandemic, really. And getting to go to rehearsal with her amazing conductor of the time, Danny Wallenberg, who's now retired, who had been my conductor in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, it was like time travel. But instead of me being the singer, I was the mom. And so I was thinking about my mom having brought me to rehearsals, who's passed. And now I'm the mom, and my daughter is learning the same music. I'm gonna cry. The same music that I was learning. It was very cool. And sorry, well, I wasn't expecting that. So the choir was planning a 60th anniversary concert and reunion. They annually now do what's called Paint the Town Red at Millennium Park downtown. And they invited alumni to learn some repertoire and perform on stage at Millennium Park. So there's me in the back doing a South African song. And it was very cool. And so I attended a workshop that fall 2016 where the facilitator said, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I thought, write a book. But I never thought I'd actually write a book. And then, yeah, one thing led to the next. And Joan Peterson, who's here, who was in the choir in the 60s and 70s and worked for the choir for many years, she'll speak in a little bit. She was one of the first people I talked to about, what if I wrote a booklet? So I was not planning to write a book. I thought I'd write a 20-page booklet about the history of the choir that would be ready for this event in the spring of 2017. And one thing led to the next, which basically meant I interviewed too many people. I had so much fun interviewing qualitative research, interviewing alumni, former staff, parents of alumni, former board members, and members of First Unitarian Church. I had too much information. I had too much data. And the former co-pastor of the First Unitarian Church sent me the audio recordings of Chris Moore, the founder, who had been interviewed in the winter of 85, 86. He died in 87, unexpectedly. About 30 hours of interviews, something like that. I'm forgetting now. It was very long, that I didn't know existed. So all of a sudden I had all this primary source documentation from Chris's voice that then I could research and find, the Tribune articles and orchestra hall programs. And that's how the book became a book that will someday soon be published. And when people think of the Chicago Children's Choir, I think they think of the Red Jackets, although the choir discontinued using the Red Jackets in 2012. But this mural by Astrid Fuller, and is she here yet? She was going to speak for a moment if she's here. I haven't seen her name pop up, so we might invite her later. Astrid, are you here? Okay, I don't think so. All right. This famous mural was on 57th Street, called The Spirit of Hyde Park. And it was very long on both sides of the street under the train tracks. And this was just a very small segment of it. But there's Christopher Moore and his wife, Judy Moore, who is instrumental in the choir as well, but doesn't get very much credit. And their son, Jonathan, who also was maybe going to be here today, but I don't think is yet. But hopefully he'll get to see that. Chris really was an incredible human being. And I'm absolutely wanting to lift him up and celebrate him and Judy and Jonathan's role, as well as
hello,
all of the women.
I'm here now.
Who don't. Oh,
I'm here now.
Oh, you're Astrid. We've never met. And you logged in as Sarah Elizabeth, so I was very confused.
Yes.
Welcome. Okay, would you like to say, oh, I accidentally muted you, I think. Would you like to speak, if you're able to unmute again, for just a moment about how you chose to put the choir in your mural? But we can't hear you. I'm so sorry. I think you accidentally muted yourself, or I accidentally muted you. All right, let's all give Astrid just another moment to unmute. Thanks, Thomas, for coming. It's another choir alum. Yep. Nope. I think she keeps muting and unmuting and muting herself accidentally. Thanks everyone for your patience.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like to share just a moment, just one moment about your picking the choir to be in your mural?
Well, I was doing the Spirit of Hyde Park, and the mural honors the Chicago Children's Choir, which was very important in the community. And I understood the value of that choir, particularly since my daughter, Valerie Fuller DePaula, spent 10 years with the choir. The wall has some defacement because of water from the back wall seeping in, which takes the paint off. So the mural is no longer available as it is now. That's it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I have another photo towards the end of what it looks like now. So unfortunately, it has been painted over by a a contemporary artist who did not maintain the red jackets and did not maintain the diversity of the kids in the choir either. So I'm now thinking I should have showed that next, but I saved that for the end. Thank you so much for speaking, and thank you for your mural. So when I was a kid growing up, I did not grow up in Hyde Park, although the Katsaros Pharmacy is the family that I am related to. People in choir were like, oh, Katsaros, like the Katsaros Pharmacy? And I was like, what? Because I'd never heard of the Katsaros Pharmacy. It's my dad's cousin, but I didn't know them growing up. So that was pretty fun. But I always loved seeing this mural, and I'm really sad that it's no longer there. The choir was used all over the city, the country, and globally, not used, but performed, invited to be a part of significant events like the reveal of the Chagall mural downtown in 1974. And the book is going to have possibly more detail than you'd like about many of these different significant occasions. But in terms of Hyde Park specifically, it was nearly annual, performing at the 57th Street Art Fair. So I have documentation for sure, because I don't have paper documentation for everything. Some of it's people's memories, but I for sure have documentation from 67, 72, and 73, 77 through 84. But I remember singing there in the 90s. So I'm suspecting it was nearly annual from 67, at least 67 to the 90s. Hyde Park Herald has been very helpful. So many great articles and photos that mention the choir. And the choir also performed pretty much annually, I think, at the Wooded Island Festival. So Jane Mather, who was kind of the informal, unofficial first executive director, if you will, took this photo. She's passed on now, and her daughter may or may not get to watch this, I hope soon. And that I believe they performed at the Wooded Island Festival 72 through 81, although I have no documentation from 76 or 80 yet, but every other year that I do. So the choir was famous for its red jackets, even though most of these photos have been in black and white so far. It started touring internationally in 67 when they went to Canada, and then in Europe, 1970. The rest of the trips were domestic until between 1970 and 1992 when the choir went to Japan. So I'm only focusing on the first 40 years of the choir. The choir is turning 65 years old, or has just turned 65 years old. The first 40 years includes 38 years in Hyde Park. So forgive my typo on the flyer. It was 31 years at the First Unitarian Church and 38 years in Hyde Park. So I am writing about the first 40 years. And Joan Peterson is here. She was an alum from 66 to 73. Are you willing to just for 1 minute tell the story of the red jackets?
Sure, Sarah, thank you.
Thanks.
Back in 1969, the choir took its annual spring tour trip to Washington, D.C. and places nearby. It was the first time we toured with any of the fellows whose voices had changed as singers. A few of them had come along as junior leaders, but not as singers. That's the 5 young men who constituted the tenor and bass section, up against 30 or 40 some odd sopranos and altos, were all told to wear nice slacks and, if not a suit, at least a sport coat or something. One of them did not have such a jacket or coat, but he had a busboy job at a hotel or restaurant downtown, and he brought along the red jacket from the Angelica Uniform Company that was the standard garb of busboys in that establishment. And as soon as he turned up, the lights went on. Bing, bing, bing. The choir didn't walk around places wearing its concert red robes, which were the standard concert attire until then, because they would soon be shredded, given the way we tended to behave when we were not on stage. So they would get packed up and put away. It was not long before an order was placed with the Angelica Uniform Company for a whole string of sizes, big enough to fit the chunkier, taller guys, and as little as they made them, including a few custom orders because they didn't make them small enough, because 7-year-olds don't normally get jobs as busboys. And one of the kids was indeed 7 who was going to be getting this jacket. I think it may have been Jonathan. Well, no, it wasn't Jonathan by then, but some kid who got in, who was kind of precocious and small. The robes, the jackets did not arrive in time to be loaded onto the bus when the bus left Chicago for a 2-week trip out to Boston and the surrounding area. There were several scattered engagements and a few others that Chris figured he could make happen on the fly, and did. The box with the jackets, box says, 2 immense cardboard boxes, caught up with us at Row Camp, a Unitarian camp and conference center in Northwest Massachusetts. We tore open the boxes, and a few of us, I just saw Lisa turn up on screen. I don't know if you were on that trip, and I don't remember if you're one of the ones who was sewing with needle and thread out there on boulders in the sunshine, sewing patches onto those jackets. You saw the jackets with patches in that opening bit, those who were here at the beginning. Some said alumni chorus. That was the guys whose voices had changed, and the girls who were rehearsed with the guys in the evenings in a separate choir called the alumni chorus. But several of us were both in children's choir and alumni chorus. Anyway, those are the jackets. That's how they got started. And at that point, we were not able to be anonymous when we were wandering around with the choir. We had to have our red jackets on so we could be counted on to all be together, and could be counted on to maybe chill on the comportment just a little bit. That's probably enough.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. So great to hear your voice directly. What I'd like to do now is go straight into a video from Christopher Moore, the founder. This is from 1972. And the choir, what I'm going to get into is the choir was racially diverse from the beginning. From 1956, there was one Black singer and maybe one Japanese American singer, and the rest were white, because it was all at the Unitarian Church. So we're going to get into the origins of the choir, but as the choir evolved, it got more and more increasingly diverse. And here is just a 3-minute clip from, because I had never seen Chris speaking before. So again, some of the people on this call, like Joan, knew Chris incredibly well, and he actually passed before I was in the choir. So here is Chris directly.
Who sponsors the choir? A little about it.
First Unitarian Church of Chicago, in cooperation with Urban Gateways, sponsors the choir. Urban Gateways is a citizens corporation that for 10 years now has been doing an exciting pilot project job of involving inner city and culturally isolated youngsters in the arts of our world today, and particularly of the world of Chicago.
Chris, I want you to know that I've had a dream for a long time that you'd bring your choir to Texas. And I want the choir to know that when you sing, you just fill my heart with joy. I don't know whether you kids realize how much you bring to the people you sing, but you bring a great deal, and to have such a wonderful choir, and to have such a reputation, and to have it here in Houston, it just fills my heart with joy. So, thank you for coming, and I want you to know how I feel, and I know that I express the gratitude of the First Church and the Emerson Church and everybody that's heard them sing. Now I want to know what it's like to be a minister to so many kids, and what are some of the problems?
Well, the exciting thing is that we're a large family. We have over 100 youngsters doing this level of work at home. We have 500 in our total program, and we're kind of a complete church to ourselves, if you will, in the dynamics of what goes on. There's a lot that you can learn about life in general through music, so that although the music is its own goal, in another sense, we're concerned with a total personal development through music. and a getting acquainted and teamwork of persons who, in this case, happen to be of many different backgrounds, but sharing a common vocal interest and skill.
Chris, how often do you take these tours, and how long are they?
Only a couple of times a year, because school assignments preclude being in the field much more than that. We aren't a school. We're strictly a couple of times after school each week in rehearsal.
Would you tell me about some of your dreams? I know you have one about an aeroplane. But what do you want the choir to do?
Well, we would like the choir to continue to be this kind of exciting family where kids get some understanding of what skill building is all about and teamwork with each other in intensive and real situations. We'd also like it to be a vehicle, as it is on this and every tour, for more people's understanding what can be done when people get it together. Because this choir knocks out most of the prejudices that people have. It's a living example of what can be done if you do things the way some of us are committed to doing them.
Will you tell us about
Sponsors.
Knocking it out of the park. So Chris had different visual appearances over the years, including donning a mustache later, and there's great stories about all of it. For the sake of time today, I'm not going to delve into all of the details, but that was from 1972, and it was powerful for me even to just see a video. I've heard his voice on many, many recordings, but I'd never seen him talk before. So his legacy lives on, his spirit lives on, and the late Andrew Patner, who was an alum, very recently, I happened to be at the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie, and on the wall outside the LGBTQ exhibit, there was Andrew Patner, Chicago Children's Choir alum, and it says there, one of the city's most influential social and cultural critics. And at Chris's memorial service in 1987, he said, Chris was like a shepherd through a cycle. Everyone has favorite memories, but the cycle was always there. Thanksgiving at Rockefeller, Songs of the Season, Vespers, Spring Tour, Flower Communion Service, June Galas, somewhere outside at the 57th Street Art Fair, and around and around and around it went, and he made you conscious of those seasons. So as I mentioned, the choir was a really significant part of Hyde Park and many Hyde Park annual events. There used to be a United Nations festival annually. That was a number of churches. The Unitarian Church was hugely significant in some of the anti-racism and organizing events or work efforts in Hyde Park and the South Side. And the choir was part of that, and Chris Moore was part of that. And the lesser known history is at the very beginning, when it was primarily white with, yes, more than one Japanese American. Apologies about that. I don't have the exact enrollment, but the first, let's say 24 singers was for sure majority white. And it was all 100% kids at the First Unitarian Church. So it wasn't called the Chicago Children's Choir when it started. It was called the Junior Choir of the First Unitarian Church, which then became the Children's Choir of the First Unitarian Church. And it wasn't until, and if you can see her in the picture, there's Ermitra Black, who is Timuel Black's daughter. I'm going to speak about in a minute. And there is Mark Morrison Reed, who was the second Black singer to join the choir, who became a minister, who wrote about what it was like to be in a majority white group in his book. So I'm going to get to all of this. So here's Mark, and he mentions in his sermon, the choir toured again to Canada in 1995 and performed at the church where he was the pastor. Minister, I always miss them. I'm sorry. I don't know which one is right. For Unitarians. A major change took place when the choir formed an alliance with Urban Gateways, which was working to enrich the lives of children living in poor interstate neighborhoods. Until then, we, the choir, had been becoming more colorful, but we'd all been middle class. With Urban Gateways came even greater diversity. So from 1956 to 1964, the choir was a church choir. It was a children's choir of the church. And there were very few singers who did not belong to that church, who were a part of the choir, just a couple, in those first 8 years before it took on the Chicago Children's Choir name and before the Red Jackets. So Mark wrote in his memoir, pretty sure that's where the citation is from. In 1957, when I was 8 years old, I joined the choir. I knew a lot of the kids from Sunday school, but in the year before, my brother Philip joined. I'd look around Woolman Hall, named for colonial abolitionist John Woolman, during rehearsal and see Ermitra across the room with the altos. And sometimes I would look at her and see myself, and becoming self-conscious that we were Black and different, I would look away. Chris Yasutaki, who was Japanese American, may have joined the same year as I. And the next year, when my brother Philip joined, so did Chris's brother Kim. And then there were the Fuji sisters, Dora and Sono, and Amicha's brother Tim, who became Kerrigan Black as an adult, and the Yasutuki's sister Karen, and slowly other people of color joined. The choir reflected the changing nature of the neighborhood around the university, which was becoming increasingly integrated despite the university's resistance. The music we sang tended toward the classical with a touch of folk and a little international flavors, but no gospels yet. We were becoming more colorful, but we'd all been middle class. And so the choir began to really diversify in 1964 when it started the first, wasn't called this then, but in-school choir at Raymond School, which is at 36 in Wabash. It's now no longer a Chicago public school, it's a charter school, I think. But there were a group of primarily university educated Black women, mothers, that Chris talks about in his book. I mean, it will be in my book, that he talks about in the interviews. This is what he said. They were in some way, some of them mothers of younger children and people with professional skills. And he said, and I might say, I don't know how explicit they'd be about this, but they were facing two scenes. This was before a both spouses working pattern became acceptable in the community at large, let alone in the Black community. And these were women who also faced the additional put down of racism and weren't about to be put down. They banded together in a group to talk about issues. So they invited this young man, Charles Burns, who was kind of the precursor to what became Urban Gateways, to meet with them. And Chris says, they became the godmothers, the community liaison volunteers with what became the pilot program at the Raymond School, and they became the core of what became Urban Gateways. So Charles Burns ended up inviting Chris to perform at Raymond School, invited the choir from the church to perform at Raymond School. And Chris said, we did the concert in the spring of 1962, and some people who were to become fellow board members of what became Urban Gateways were there, and I was invited to the next meeting of the board and the making, and the whole thing just began to grow. And so then there was a librarian at Raymond School who was a longtime member at the First Unitarian Church, Aurelia Moody, who asked him, are you really coming? And he said, yes. So they went down, he went down and met with them. And I don't have a photo of her, but I do have a photo here of Sadie Nesbitt. She was a legend in Chicago. She was responsible for the Institute of Psychoanalysis, special training programs. She had something to do with Erickson Institute, basically. And she was a master teacher at Johnson. So she was sort of the link to a lot of the next schools after Raymond of the West Side schools. So Howland, St. Agatha's. Yeah, so Chris said, Sadie Nesbitt connected us to our West Side roots. She was a kindred spirit. I think she became interested early because she saw the possibilities of this program. And Chris said, the school programs needed bridge people, and the program flourished where you had them. Sadie ran a tremendous amount of interference for me and taught me a lot, but in a very genial way. A unit of the choir sang in her memorial service some years later when she died of cancer very tragically in 1969. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying to, in the book, uplift as many women and people of the global majority as possible who don't often get a lot of credit in their roles in making the choir was what it was. And I'm going to now invite Dodie Morris Whitaker, who was an alum, who was a singer, 77 to 86, to read a quote. And this is her as a child and her sister when they were on TV with the choir in 1979. Her sister, who passed tragically in a car accident in 1994, when I was in the choir, and she was in our program that the concert was dedicated to her. So her photo and her name, and I'd never met her and I didn't know her, but her death impacted me. And so I invited Dodie to speak, to read this next quote by Dr. Eve Ewing, a professor at U of C.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm here with my dad, Calvin Morris, who's also a historian, and we're just enjoying the presentation so much and just commend you on all the hard work you've done to put this together. And it's also, of course, just wonderful to see all the faces of folks that I know. So Sarah asked me to read this quote, and as she mentioned, my sister Rachel was in the choir. She actually was, let's see, she was left in '87 because my family moved to Michigan. But I just want to tell just a brief story about how she got in the choir. I had a babysitters, and as I mentioned, my Sunday school teacher and the chat there, and so many influential people in the choir. And I was just so excited, and I was waiting for the time that I was ready to audition. And I finally went and sang for Chris, and I went upstairs to Woolman Hall, and my sister came with me, and I was 9 years old at the time. So I sang My Country 'Tis of Thee, and as most of us did back then. And then he turned to her and he said, "Do you want to sing too?" And she said, "Yeah." She's 6 years old. And he put us both in the first soprano section, and we were actually in CIT at first and kind of moved up the ranks. But I think she was probably, along with John Moore, his son, probably one of the youngest people to ever join the choir at that time. So just wanted to mention that. So this beautiful quote from Ghosts in the Schoolyard. This story unfolds against the backdrop of Chicago, my beautiful, hideous, deeply flawed, lovely, violent, endearing, maligned, beloved hometown. It's a city frequently noted as one of the most persistently segregated places in the nation, a towering metropolis built on a foundation of housing discrimination and violence. The city is not only a setting, but a character, a force acting in its own ways to influence the lives of the people who live here.
So Dr. Ewing, I really love her and appreciated her book, made me think about Chicago and its influence on the Chicago Children's Choir, which does have the word Chicago in its name. That if the Chicago Children's Choir was the Denver Children's Choir or the Tucson Children's Choir, it would be a different story. And so Chicago is, and Chicago history, and therefore Hyde Park history, is a part of the story of the choir. And prior to settler colonialists, it was all native land. So let's just take a step back. All of Chicago and all of the entire country and continent, Western Hemisphere, were indigenous land, all of it. And Chicago incorporated as a town in 1833, which isn't actually that long ago, and as a city in 1837. So part of why this book has taken me so long, besides that I'm writing part-time, is the history part, is trying to really understand the context. And so we can see the growth of Chicago's non-native population. And that's not supposed to go next, but there it is. Land acknowledgements are becoming common and a practice, which is good. And there's some challenges sometimes that they can just be performative. And so to honor the traditional custodians of the land, which include the Potawatomi, you may hear in Chicagoland other people mention the Odawa and Ojibwe, and there's many, many tribes and nations of people who were custodians and caretakers of the land, and who lived and loved and laughed and traded and healed, and were here. And land acknowledgements are not meant to just be performative, like, check, I'm not racist, look how woke I am, I did a land acknowledgement. They're really meant to call you to action. And so when I first heard one some years ago, I got really, I was called to action of like, so who are the native people who are still in Chicago? And there are about 65,000 in Cook County, which I had no idea. And many of them or at the American Indian Center, which is where I started. So these are all Native women, 4 of who used to work at the American Indian Center. And I started making friends and I was like, I would like to work with you. Are you interested? And can I do something with you? And I kind of became obsessed, as Clint knows, with changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, which is a international movement nationally since '92 in Berkeley, California. And more states and cities and municipalities and school districts around the country are changing Columbus Day. And so I started working with the American Indian Center around changing it for the Chicago Public Schools. As I mentioned, I'm an educator. And we did it. It took a couple of years and a lot of work, but we were successful. And this is another CCC alum, Jonathan Brooks, who's a pastor who came on, who spoke, testified on that day. It was awesome. This was at Chicago Public School Board of Ed meeting. And there's actually my mom in the 90s that had a t-shirt that said something like, how could Columbus have discovered America when, and I can't read the rest of it, but it's like millions of Native people were already living here or something like that. So I was inspired. I know she gave money in 1992, which was the 500th technically marking of the 1492. And I was quoted in the Tribune, which was flattering because this is not anti-Italian. It's not anti-Italian, just full stop. It's not anti-Italian. It's just anti-Columbus and anti-genocide. So, and anti-white supremacy. If you are called to take action after this land acknowledgement of a casual sort, there are some links that I'll put in the chat at the end because I can't do this second, or you can copy them down. bit.ly/IPD for Indigenous Peoples Day. Cook County is a very quick fillable email that sends it to all the Cook County commissioners, because that's where we're working next, is trying to get Cook County to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. There's also in Spanish. If you're in a part of an organization like the Hyde Park Historical Society, you could sign on. There's another link, IPD Coalition IL, and it's all capitalized matters, where your organization can sign on, so people can share that with their nonprofits, businesses, faith-based communities. And then donating money is something else you can do. So centerfornativefutures.org has a link where you can donate. So please think about that. I know Seattle, there's a program in Seattle that's called like Real Rent, and it's giving money to a local tribe. The issue with Illinois is there are 0 tribes. There are 0 federally recognized tribes that have land in Illinois because of the Clement settler movement that was so thorough. So this is all to say that Chicago, as more and more non-Native people started to live here, became more increasingly diverse. And what I mostly want to point out is the decades between the 50s and 60s when the choir was founded, and the change in demographics, the white flight to the suburbs, and the huge increase in the Black community because of the Great Migration. So the city went from 85, so it was in the 90% white for a long time, 86% white, 13% Black, to 76% white, 22% Black in the decade. So this is the situation in which the choir was founded. It was not initially founded in response to the civil rights movement, which is what the choir today likes to say. That's not true. It was a church choir. It was diverse, although it was still all Unitarian and not as diverse as it became once it started working with urban gateways. And so there's just a visual representation of quote unquote race, which is a social construct, but of Chicago's population. The choir also, and I know I'm running out of time and I ask you to bear with me, I've never done this before. I have never tried to condense a full-length book into a 45-minute talk. So I'm clearly not doing a great job at my pacing. It's all so interesting to me. I have a really hard time picking what to leave out, and you can tell me later what I could leave out, but I may or may not take your advice. So the choir moved to the Sinai Temple in 1987, right after Chris Moore passed, about 2 weeks before he passed, actually. The Sinai Temple used to be on 54th, between Hyde Park Blvd and Lakeshore Drive, and every time I go by there and I look at those condo or whatever they're called, buildings, I'm sad, because that's where I grew up in choir. And so choir was founded in Hyde Park, and Hyde Park has always had this great reputation as being really diverse, and it is. And Hyde Park's not perfect either. So you may or may not know all this information, but in 1897, white property owners on Chicago's Woodlawn neighborhood, was just to the south of Hyde Park, declared war on African Americans, driving all African Americans from the area with threats of violence, unimpeded by public authority. And I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes from the book here that are quotes from other people. The rapid increase in Chicago's African American population with accompanying competition for jobs and housing between blacks and whites led to a noticeable rise of racial tensions in the city by the early 1900s. In the Hyde Park section to the south of the Loop near the University of Chicago, for example, white residents formed a protective organization in 1908 to restrict blacks to specified residential districts. The Hyde Park Improvement Protective Club used vandalism, intimidation, and economic boycotts to force African Americans out of prescribed neighborhoods. It advocated segregation in the Chicago public schools and attempted to segregate such public facilities as parks and playgrounds. Skipping down, in 1909, the Hyde Park Improvement Protective Club, with more than 300 members and support from a local newspaper, promised to blacklist real estate agents who sold homes to Black people and boycott merchants who provided them with goods and services. It's not funny. I was pretty appalled. I didn't know this history. So Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, he mentions the Hyde Park Improvement Protective Club also offered to buy out the homes of African Americans who lived in the area. If these tactics were unsuccessful, whites engaged in vandalism, throwing rocks through African Americans' windows. The leader of the club was a prominent attorney, and the club published a newsletter promoting segregation, so it would not have been difficult for authority to interfere with the conspiracy, but no measures were undertaken. The club soon boasted 350 members. The group operated more quietly after 1909, but it had achieved its major goal. This is his word in the book, Negro community on Lake Avenue dwindled in size, and the rest of Hyde Park remained white for 40 years. So this is important because it sets the stage for the founding of the choir. Chris Moore first was in Chicago in the spring of 1950 to 1953 when he was attending graduate school at Melville Lombard Theological Seminary, which used to be kitty corner from the First Unitarian Church. So as many of you know, the 1919 race riot started just north of Hyde Park, where 17-year-old Eugene Williams was stoned to death. And it lasted 5 days, and 38 people were killed, and 64% of the 537 people who were injured were Black. And more than 1,000 Black families were left homeless due to burnings and destruction of property. And so the author of The Third Coast says, for all the humanist philosophy spouted in Hyde Park, the neighborhood has always been deeply and violently segregated. Fiery homeowner meetings there helped spark the 1919 race riots. So the civil rights movement was not just the Black liberation movement, which is critically important and central. It also was the Chicano movement, the American Indian movement, the gay rights movement, second-wave feminism, disability rights movement, and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And Chris was absolutely influenced by all of these movements. He was a minister. He was a humanist. He was, even though I never met him, from my impressions and from everything I've read and heard him speak and everything everyone ever has told me, he was anti-racist. He was not sexist. He was inclusive of people of different religions and languages and abilities. Some of the kids in choir really couldn't sing all that well, and they were still allowed to be in choir. So the choir started at the First Unitarian Church, and I'm pretty much out of time. I have tons more that is all going to be in the book. And so I hope that I whet your appetite. Timmy Black, who just passed recently, this was at his 100th birthday celebration at the First Unitarian Church. His voice is in the book. His story about going to the University of Chicago in 1952, and his daughter Amitra, who was the first and only Black singer in the choir when it was founded in 56, wanting to know about God, and he ended up bringing her to the Unitarian Church. They ended up going to the Unitarian Church. The choir quickly got to Orchestra Hall when it was still the children's choir of the First Unitarian Church. The choir performed in, I think, about 11 operas. They were the house choir of the lyric opera as the children's choir of the First Unitarian Church, because it was not yet called the Chicago Children's Choir. So I think you've heard enough for me. From Chris's words, I don't have time to cue up his voice right now, but he's interviewed by Studs Terkel on the radio in 1959, and he says the prerequisite is carrying a tune, a certain amount of enthusiasm, and of course, perseverance, sticking with it. What really counts is the attention and the sort of giving themselves to it and enjoying it. So he talks about non-singers who became singers. The work of Chris and folks at the Unitarian Church in Hyde Park had national influence very quickly because he was hired to, or he volunteered, I don't know. He put together this simple kind of hymn book, if you will, and then he contributed to the hymn book for Unitarians for the country. The choir started working with Ella Jenkins as early as 1961. The choir was constantly on TV and getting incredible opportunities like performing for President Lyndon Johnson when at the funeral of Adlai Stevenson. It has been a really fun journey to learn all of this. And if you are so kind to give a small contribution to my work, I would be super grateful. I'll put that link in the chat too. I'm sorry, we're running out of time for questions, but I really appreciate everyone being here. I'm hoping to have it published. I'm not going to promise in 2022 or 2023 because there's a lot of changes going on in my life, but I'm curious, how did I do? So my goals I said at the beginning were enjoy your hour, learn a lot, raise some questions that make you want to read the book and also other books, and keep learning history. I am gonna stop screen sharing. How did I do? Oh, it would not be outrageous to sing, but I don't think Zoom, thank you so much. Zoom is not very considerate of multiple voices at the same time.
Yeah.
I can
No,
play.
well, what
Did a
I would like
great
to
job.
suggest, Sarah, I know there are a number of people who would like to speak and share their reminiscences, and we're all perfectly happy to do that. What I would suggest is that you ask people to raise their hands and then you unmute them and ask them to speak. How does that sound to you?
Works. Yeah, I am happy to stay longer. I know we advertise this as 2 to 3. I want to be respectful. Oh, let me put HTTPS. If people need to go, completely understand that. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I'm sometimes long-winded. It's hard for me to pick what to share and not share. There was so much, and I've never tried to condense an entire book into a 45-minute talk before. But yes, I am happy to stay, and just be aware we're gonna, I think, keep the recording going. So as long as you are giving consent to be recorded, then people who aren't here can also watch it. I'd love to hear. Dodie's raised her hand, and then we'll see who else wants to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I neglected to mention that my mom is on the call, and she has a very long history with the children's choir as well. And I know there wasn't time to mention everyone, but I just wanted to remember Ivy Beard as, you know, just incredibly talented and influential, just pioneer, and Joe Brewer, and there's so many people, but just wanted to mention that in case anyone had any questions for my mom. She's here.
Thank you. They will absolutely all be in the book. I just couldn't get them all in the talk today. Yeah, and then this is the last slide that I had wanted to show also too. If you haven't seen the new mural, the revision of the mural. This is the late Brenny Ness, who worked for the choir for a very long time. I'm forgetting right now, 27 years, I think, and was instrumental. The late Salik Ziad, who was a singer of my generation, alumni Bethany Pickens, many of you know Willie Pickens, and Anita Snow Orlikoff, myself, and my daughter. So this was a couple of years ago, and we were just kind of like, what the heck is this? This revisioning of the mural with all white faces and clothing is kind of disturbing. So thank you everyone for being here. Who else would like to share? Yep, I mentioned Jane Mather. Yeah, yeah. Everyone will be in the book. I couldn't fit them all in the top. Don't think that if I didn't mention them, they're not in the book. They're in the book. I just couldn't, but I did mention Jane. Any questions?
Okay, Sarah, I saw that Judith had her hand raised.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Judith.
Judith,
Can you
unmute yourself,
unmute
please.
yourself? Or does Sarah need to do that? Oh, there she goes.
I can do it. Okay. I just, I think you did a great job. I would probably spend more time on the later parts, which I'm sure you
No,
were
I
planning
will in
to
the
do.
book. I will.
Yeah. And, you know, the choir, I don't think people who were involved in it, who were not involved in it, understand what it meant to our lives. The interracial aspect of it was gigantic, especially at that time. I mean, I have interracial daughters. It was huge for us. Rachel did indeed join the choir when she was 6. And Chris invited her. I mean, it wasn't Rachel's idea. But I think that the book is a wonderful thing that you're doing and very, very valuable. And I hope people will be able to read it. It changed our lives and meant an enormous amount to us. And Ivy Beard was a spectacular human being. But there were a lot of wonderful conductors. Over the years, the changes and the conductors it's really been spectacular. Tours were a huge event for my children. Huge event. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, it's a large organization that's been around for a long time. So doing the research to, number one, try to understand it, and then number two, try to write it, to try to capture as many.
I just want to say one more thing. If you're an idealist, the way I have always been, and something of an activist, I used to sit probably in the front row most of the time when the choir would file on before my children were in it, and I would just weep. I would just sit there with tears coming down my face because there were this racial mix, this economic mix, which I'm sure you've talked about, the friendships they made, what it meant just got right inside me. So I'd sit there crying part of the time anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if you were here when I started to cry myself at the beginning, but it really, you know, my journey as a mother of a singer more recently, and it's a very different organization now.
Yes.
So that was also hard for me. It was that also motivated me to write the book because it's so different. I wanted to make sure to honor the first 40 years. Yeah, we've got 2 hands. I see Rosalie. Go ahead. I'm not sure who went first, but go ahead, Rosalie.
Hi, I just wanted to know, do you know why they got rid of the red jacket?
I don't. Because
that was the best part of it.
I hope the best part was the singing and the friendship. And the
I know. When you saw the red jacket, you knew you were in for a treat.
I know. I have a theory. That they wanted to modernize and sort of stylize, you know, upgrade the aesthetics, because the red jackets, when you look at pictures, you're like, yeah, they're a little frumpy. I mean, they're a little not so stylish. And I think the new CEO is very stylish. So I think there's some people who work for the choir now who believe in appearances a little bit more maybe than the choir used to, is my theory and my opinion. That will not be in the book. Lauren has her hand raised. Is that, yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm the baby of the family.
Never met, but I heard your name. It's so nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. And, you know, I just wanted to say that to this day, the choir was so important in my life, the friends that I made. And I think I was probably in the choir from, I don't remember, you know, at least until 76. and then came out to California. The choirs are still important. It gave me my discipline, my focus. It helped me understand the value of learning to deal with people outside of my comfort zone. And so I'm so appreciative that you put this together. I hope that you come and speak again, because I think as people hear about it, more and more people are going to want to hear your story and read your book. I'm thinking about, I was in the basement. My father's home is still in Chicago, and I'm still finding pictures of singing at the 57th Street Art Fair, and just such a wealth of an experience for all four of my siblings who grew up in the choir and had an opportunity to be a part of the tour unit. So I just want to thank you. I'm in Santa Cruz now, but I heard that you were doing this, and I thought, there's no way. I've definitely got to be there and see and hear. So thank you, and please do this again.
I will. I would be happy to. Thank you, Hyde Park Historical Society, for hosting me. Thank you all for coming. I'd be happy to do a part 2. I definitely had more. I definitely had a hard time estimating how long things would take. But yes, the book is a full-length book. I don't know how many pages, and I don't know when it's going to be finished, because I keep finding more, and I keep going down rabbit holes that at some point I'm just going to have to say enough is enough. But it's been a joy to learn, and I hope to tour with the book. I've already been thinking about California and DC and New York and the Southeast. There's a lot of alums in Atlanta. I have a lot of tour itineraries from the Chicago Children's Choir tours, which domestically always used to be focused around Unitarian churches all over the country. So I have been in touch with ministers and former ministers, retired, and most of them retired at this point. People who knew Chris. I've interviewed people who were at those churches when the choir was on tour. So you could say I have some perfectionist tendencies, and I'm very thorough, and I want the story to be recorded. I want people's voices to be honored, and it will be done when it's done. But all of you, many of you have contributed your stories and your time and your memories and documentation. People have scanned things and photographed things and emailed and sent stuff in the mail. And Franny Ness, who passed, sent me a box of tapes, of audio tapes. Everyone's been so generous. It's definitely a collaborative effort, and I'm really gracious. I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for all of you and spending time with me this afternoon. And yes, thank you, Grace. If people are willing to donate to the GoFundMe, that would be really helpful. I am basically unemployed right now, and I'm getting divorced. So that is part of why the book is taking a little longer, because I moved. And
all right, well, Sarah, I want to thank you for joining us and for putting together this wonderful program. I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the program as much as we all did. The session has been recorded, and when probably in a few days, it takes me a little while to get a session like this edited. We will post it to the Hyde Park Historical Society website, and I'm going to show you that. Can you stop sharing your screen, Sarah, so I can share mine? Okay. All right, this is the Hyde Park Historical Society's website. The video will be up on this site sometime next week, probably. Our website address is www.hydeparkhistory.org, which you can see in the upper left. And again, thank you all for coming today. It's been a wonderful program.
And Michael, really quick.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Just want to encourage everyone, in addition to supporting Sarah, to think about taking out a membership with the Hyde Park Historical Society. We're doing amazing work, and we want all the support we can get to continue to expand and highlight Hyde Park. So That's it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will close out now and hope to see you at future meetings and programs. And remember, May 29th, we're going to do a history of Promontory Point, and we've got other things coming up. So check our website out. And again, thank you for coming.